There's quite a bit in your book about networks or scenes.
Right.
Art scenes, and maybe you can talk a little bit about the importance of a scene, and maybe touch on I think a phrase that you deployed, repetitive performance or repetitive exposure, and how this is sort of central to the creative economy, in that there's a need for sort of a critical mass or density of creative people in different fields of arts, and who act as a sounding board for each other.
Okay, so this
Does that question make sense at all?
Kind of.
Kind of. Okay. Good. Close enough.
So a scene is a very ephemeral and nebulous concept. You know, an art scene, a music scene, where people hang out. So what does that really mean? For the people that I interviewed, what became really important time and time again was that they do a lot of their work in these scenes. So it's not just that they hang out. They're very cognizant of the fact that if they continue to go to art openings or you know, special music like DJ nights at certain clubs, or fashion shows, or after parties, or certain restaurants, or certain bars at certain days of the week, that they will run into the people that will mobilize their career. And so there are these discrete ways in which the scene actually is incredibly important in the advancement of the careers of cultural producers. So it's often that they will go and they will either, you know, run into people in this sort of ad hoc way, where they'll literally be hanging out, having a drink with somebody, and the person they'll be spending time with will say, you know, we really need a graphic designer because we just signed this new band, and we need someone to do the cover really soon. And, you know, the graphic designer sitting there having a drink will say, I'd do that, like I could do it. And the guy will sit there in this sort of spontaneous way and say, great, like give me a call on Monday. And so that is an example of what seems, for them, happens over and over again. Another thing that happens is that these scenes are often places where gatekeepers are. Now, you know, someone like Anna Wintour or Jeffrey Deitch or, you know, the curator for the MoMA, they get to see thousands and thousands of things, you know, whether it's like clothing lines or pieces of art. And how do they make a decision about what's good art? I mean, obviously they're experts, but part of the process is the fact that they socially engage with the people who produce those products. And so in these social environments, they often interact with them, and that is kind of the opening, you know, sort of the catalyst for them being able to show them their stuff in the long term, and distinguishes them from, you know, the countless other artists that send stuff to their gallery. You know, and another mechanism that happens is often they're at these, you know, clubs, and they run into people and they talk about doing business together and collaborating. So, you know, these are just examples of the way in which these things happen in what seem like informal situations, but clearly there are these mechanisms occurring within the scene, and the cultural producers are aware of them, so they kind of reinforce the mechanisms because they continue to go out. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I would talk to someone who would say, you know, there are so many times where I don't want to go out, but I have to go out. You know, I have to go out. You never know who I'll run into. You never know, like, what kind of work might come out of going to this art opening or this fashion show, or, you know, whatever, you know, event it is that they go to for social reasons. And so the very fact that they're aware of it means that they continue to show up, and it sort of creates this cumulative effect of the scene being an important part of, you know, the whole cultural economy. Does that answer your question?
It does answer my question. Okay. You exceeded my expectations. What was interesting in your book is that you express a concern that a city like New York, which is so prohibitively expensive, might sort of, you know, surrender its hold on the creative economy. And you elucidated this process whereby artists of a variety of stripes will set up camp in a specific neighborhood, render it more interesting than it had ever been, because the galleries will open up, and then, you know, a nightlife is generated to serve the artists. But as a consequence, these neighborhoods become fashionable.
Right.
And so others with more money move in, and the rates are driven up, the cost of living is higher, and the artists find that really a neighborhood they created is now prohibitively expensive to them. I mean, they're sort of driven out by their own success. And so here's the unfair question I wanted to ask you. So what? Why is it important that New York have a monopoly on the arts?
But I think that this is a good point. The so what thing is really important. Okay. So you're saying.
So why New York?
Okay. I would say why New York is important fundamentally for New York. I mean, if New York wants to keep its competitive advantage in creativity, it has to start retaining it and dealing with the fact that it's become an increasingly cost-prohibitive city for the creative people who've been coming there. So it's not like the East Village art movement anymore. So you know that kind of scene can't exist, and if they want it to exist, they need to actually be proactive about it. In the larger scale, yeah, it's probably better for other cities if not everyone goes to New York City, right? All that said, and I talk about this a lot in the book, the density and diversity of creativity produces enormous benefits, not just to the region in which it resides, but to kind of the global cultural market. And so my sense is now that somewhere like Athens, Georgia, may be incredibly good at producing a particular kind of culture or creativity. We know that a lot of great rap music comes from the South now, so that's like a specialty. But I don't know if any of these cities, if New York City's creativity would diffuse to lots of different places, would ever be able to pull it off. You know, Los Angeles and New York City in the United States are arguably, clearly the cultural hubs, and they are because they're not specialized, as you said yourself. Like there's this concentration of lots of different kinds of creativity, and that kind of concentration fuels these kinds of dynamics. And so I think it's actually in the best interest of, the United States as a whole and for larger global cultural markets if we're able to preserve these really special social and economic dynamics that happen in these particular metropolitan areas. And of course, supporting the cultural niche markets in other cities, but we wouldn't want New York to lose that.
I've wondered if, if you're thinking about bands like the Talking Heads, if their being in New York was so beneficial because there were established clubs, so many people outside of New York would visit. You had Rolling Stone magazine sort of up the street, and they could sort of spread the news internationally. Whereas the musicians in the smaller cities I mentioned, often discuss how their success, occurred after a kind of a long haul at a 45-degree angle.
Right.
It may be sort of location in New York afforded a kind of more immediate taste of success.
No, you bring up two really important points here. First of all, we didn't really talk about this, but one of the critical factors in the success of New York's creative economy is the media surrounding it. They interact constantly. There's this simultaneous exchanging, and the media is really what allows the creativity in New York to be distributed to the world, and it validates it. Because I mean, there's, you can be a really interesting creative artist in, Wichita, and if no one picks up on it and no one writes about it, then no one's going to know how creative you are. So
you've got to take your act to New York.
Yeah, you have to take your act to where it is, and then the second thing.
Or to Princeton.
Or to Princeton, of course, the new New York.
The new New York, right.
Tell Bloomberg to watch out.
That's right.
So that's the one thing. And the second thing is that this relationship and this density of media and creativity makes New York what I've been calling a global tastemaker. So it reaffirms that David Byrne and the Talking Heads came out of New York, and they jumped through the hoops in New York. Makes them successful across the world, because people take what New York thinks is successful, the world thinks is successful.
Right.
So. Because
they had made it there, and also sort of, even the venues in which they played, like CBGB, were widely known outside of New York.
Yes.
So this made sort of for good, copy.
Yes.
In writing reviews or stories about Talking Heads.
Yeah, absolutely.